When I was 16, I went to the woods with a friend. We were camping near a lake. The location I cannot say, since it is near my friend's lake house. We went deep into the forest, and we heard some sort of howl. The howl even scared a bear that was nearby the path we were taking. I tried to tell my friend that she shouldn't go nowhere near there, but she kept insisting to keep going in further. She told me, "Where is your adventurous spirit?" So reluctantly, I went with her, and we trekked on until about 1:00 a.m. We set up camp and everything, but when we were setting up the fire, it continued to die. Every time we lit the flame, a very strong gust of wind kept killing it until about the 5th time. Suddenly, another howl echoed through the forest. So we skipped eating and went straight to the tent until around 4 or 5 a.m. I then heard a tree snapping and some crashing noises. I also heard the sound of a snarl. My friend, who I actually liked, hugged me, and I was happy about that. But under the circumstances, we were pissing scared. We heard the creature tearing my tent, and we'd hid under the blankets and held our breath. The creature eventually went away, and I was able to look at it. It was big and skinny. It used an animal skull to cover its face, but the animal skull looked like it was a weird unicorn type of shape, and it had wings. The creature looked like a cross between a Wendigo and the Jersey Devil. My friend accidentally turned and crushed a twig. The creature heard it and came back to the tent. I told my friend to run as fast as she could, and good thing she was a running athlete at the time. When the creature was coming back, my friend got out of the blankets and ran like the wind. The creature, for some reason, didn't care about her. It looked at me, and so I tried to run, but it caught me and bit my leg. I kept the gun near me, and so I went and shot its eye, and it squirmed and let me go. I took the opportunity and ran as quickly as I could, but I was still quite slow. And after it finished squirming, it jumped up and flew to a tree, roaring loudly. I ran and shot at it again and again, trying to scare it away, but it kept coming until I jumped into the lake. I guess the creature must not have a good sense of smell, since it didn't follow me inside the water. It roared angrily and it flew to somewhere. I don't know where, as I lost view of it completely. My friend was so scared. After a while, I got out of the lake and limped my way over to my friend, who was heaving and breathing heavily. She called her parents, and we were picked up. When we told them about what we experienced, they went extremely quiet. Very hesitantly, they both turned to face us and told us that what we had just seen was a creature that was actually called the Unicorn Man.
North Carolina incident. This happened to me in January of 2019 in western North Carolina, around the small town of Silver. I was participating in a week-long program to get certified as a first responder for wilderness first aid and rescue. I am studying to become a forester, and it is important to know how to keep people alive in the woods when things go wrong. There are two primary locations in the complex: a classroom with some bathrooms and a kitchen, where we spent most of the day in class and ate meals, and a group of one-room cabins on top of a steep hill directly north of the classroom, where we would sleep. An important thing to note about the cabins is the heating system. Each cabin has a small but powerful radiator in it that makes the cabin feel like a sauna if left on for too long. Since it was January in the Appalachians, it was pretty chilly outside at night, so the heat was needed. In order to strike a balance between boiling in our beds and getting hypothermia, we would turn on the radiator and leave the window open so that warm and cold air could circulate and create a reasonable temperature. Don't get at me about the waste of power, I didn't like it either. The radiator and the open window were at the front of the cabin, next to the door, and my bed was directly across from the window. The incident happened on the 5th day, a Thursday, of my time there. My boyfriend and I, who was enrolled in a program with me, had settled down for the night in the cabin we shared with one other person. We had gone to sleep as normal, and were sleeping soundly on 2 bunks that we had pushed together so we could sleep next to each other. Sometime during the night, I was woken up by some shuffling on the other side of the room near the window. I heard my boyfriend say in a complaining voice, "Can't we close this window? I wake up feeling frozen." I wake up more and sat up in my bed groggily, about to answer him, when I heard another voice say, "If we close the window, it'll get too hot and we'll wake up sweaty." I snapped awake and froze where I was sitting. The voice that had responded was my voice. There was something very strange and wrong in hearing your own voice repeated back to you. In the dark, I looked down next to me where I saw my boyfriend sleeping soundly. At this point, a mortal dread had a tight grip on my chest, and I forced myself not to move or even blink. I was focused intently on the place near the window, fearfully anticipating more of my own words. I heard more shuffling outside the window, and my same words were repeated. "If we close the window, it'll get too hot and we'll wake up sweaty." Followed quickly by my boyfriend's voice again. "Can't we close this window? I wake up feeling frozen." Towards the end of the last repetition of my boyfriend's words, there seemed to be an unevenness about the enunciation, like raising and lowering of the pitch slightly. I remained frozen in my bed, feeling my hand fall asleep in my propped up position. I sat there for what felt like 15 or 20 minutes, listening to whatever it was shuffle around in front of our window, separated from me by about some odd 10 feet and window mesh. Eventually, the shuffling became more frequent, and a weird mumbling sound came from the outside the window, with no real words being said, or none that I could make out. This particular behavior didn't last long before the shuffling sound moved to the left of the window to the door, where a scratching sound began to manifest. As the sound moved, I saw the silhouette of a medium-height figure that moved in an uncanny way, like when a baby animal tries to walk for the first time but isn't quite strong enough to stand up correctly. It sounded like someone was scraping some dry sticks against the wood of the door. Not aggressively, but kind of like an impatient dog asking to be let in. The scratching slowly moved around the cabin, stopping when it reached the wall that I was closest to. My ears were strained to hear anything that might indicate further action, but all I could hear were footsteps on the dry leaves. The footsteps eventually moved away from the cabin and down the other side of the hill and didn't return for the rest of the night. I stayed unmoving from my position for at least another half hour before my body readjusted itself slightly, letting blood flow back into my asleep limbs. I was wide awake until my boyfriend's and my other roommates' alarms went off sometime before dawn to get ready for the day, which felt like maybe 2 hours, but I couldn't be certain because I didn't have a clock. My boyfriend was surprised that I was awake before him, as I am typically a later sleeper. But I just told him his alarm woke me up and tried to act somewhat normally. We got up and got ready for our day, but I refused to leave the cabin until the sun began to peek over the mountains. For the rest of the week, I was on edge and felt like there were eyes on me whenever it was relatively dark out. Though I'm not sure how much of this was raw paranoia. In the day following the incident at night, I had realized the lines that were repeated to me by the voice were part of a conversation that my boyfriend and I had had earlier in the week, and I came to the conclusion that whatever it was had been outside our cabin and heard us talking. This scared me a great deal, as I also realized that it had likely been lurking there in the following nights as well without us realizing it, and might do so again for our remaining nights, though it ended up not coming back. I waited to tell my boyfriend about this until we had left the program because he scares easy and was already a little wary of walking in the woods at night up to the cabins. It should be noted that I know this to not be a sleep paralysis experience, as I have had them before, and they were nothing like this. Not to mention I was able to move. I'm posting this here also as a means of asking for advice in addition to getting it off my chest, as this winter I will have to return to the same location to renew my certification. Expires 2 years after acquisition, and I want to know as much as I can so I can hopefully avoid another encounter.
This happened summer of last year. I was currently living at my dad's house, which is a small town in southern Illinois. I had driven the same path back and forth many times to see my girlfriend, and nothing ever eventful went down. I mean, I'm talking 40 minutes of nothing but fields, farms, and forest. You never see pedestrians on the road because there's nothing around. No bicyclists, barely any construction workers. So anyway, I had just spent a day with my girlfriend and was feeling pretty good. I had a good dinner and decided to go home around 1 a.m. I started driving back when it started to rain pretty good. Around halfway home, the rain was getting lighter, and I was going about 40 miles per hour, as my car does not handle any sort of bad weather well. To this day, I get chills thinking about what I saw next. To the right of the road, I saw a very tall, naked, humanoid-like creature. It was gray-skinned, long-armed, and had holes for eyes. I saw it maybe 2 to 3 seconds driving by, but it was enough to make me sob all the way home from fear. Eventually, I called my girlfriend and told her. I was still sobbing and couldn't stop checking around me. I've never had a hallucination sober in my life, so I figured there was no way I couldn't have seen what I saw. I tried to tell myself it could have been a strange person, but there was no car pulled to the side, and there was no way they'd be out in the middle of nowhere, naked in the rain, and still be standing. It was the first and only time I've ever seen something that made me cry from fear. If anybody knows what it was, or has any idea, please let me know. I still think about it a lot, but nobody ever believes me when I try to talk about it. A lot of people think I was just tired or imagined it, but I know what I saw. It was definitely real.
Hey, I just found this sub as I have become quite a believer since this encounter. I had been moderately open to the idea of other beings before this, be they worldly, extraterrestrial, or extra-dimensional in nature before this occurred, but more in the hey, wouldn't it be cool sort of way. I am now actively looking to see if someone had ever seen something similar. So here goes as detailed as possible. I was in my early 20s when this happened, still living with my parents. Back then I was used to drive around at night, listening to music and just killing time, really. I grew up rurally and I didn't have a large circle of friends, so I often had nothing better to do but get out of the house, and I just enjoyed cruising around. This night was different as I had an argument with my father and I had to leave the house just to clear my head. I decided on the way to grab a small flask of vodka at the gas station and just drive out the village and look at the stars. The area I ended up parking was surrounded by cornfields and small patches of wood. Very agricultural, and I could still make out the lights of the closest village in the distance and hear the hum of the freeway relatively close by. The last area you'd expect to run into something unusual, not very remote, no untouched wilderness. I drove off the main road, parked on a dirt road leading into a little patch of forest, and there was a large cornfield on my right and a patch of grassland on my right. Just a meadow, no fencing or animals though. It was pitch black, so I left the car lights on to take a stroll, vodka flask in hand. I immediately felt nervous getting out of the car. There was kind of an eerie vibe to the area despite how mundane it looked. I was hyper aware of the sounds around me, the hum of the freeway, and crickets chirping. All I wanted to do in that instance was to keep driving and just go home, but back then I figured it was just me being a coward. And while there was no way I would stay and stargaze in this mood, I figured I'd owe it to myself to just go for a short jog towards that patch of wood, just to prove to myself that I wasn't a big pussy. It hasn't occurred to me back then that my subconscious might have picked up on me being watched, because when I started to run towards the woods just at the edge of what my car lights illuminated, something broke out of the undergrowth and sprinted towards me. I was startled like this before when it turned out it was deer. This time it wasn't. I nearly fell over as a seemingly naked man broke out of the forest and ran towards me. I stared in disbelief as I made out its features. It was humanoid, light skin colored from what I could tell, way larger than I am, a good 2 heads taller. I'm 5'11", and seemed very muscular. I did not make out any hair or genitalia. I don't recall if I jumped or tripped, but I wavered for a moment and had to catch my footing, as I was so startled I almost fell. Now I think I remember having larger animal-like eyes, but I remember distinctly that it had no defined lips, and a very short nose, mostly consisting of elongated slits. It circled around me. Later on I figured it might not have wanted to directly walk into the lights of my car. It made a noise at me like a startled dog. Kind of a huff, but it felt very hostile. Then it ran off, crossing the road into the cornfield with very large, seemingly confident struts. It was really fast and did not seem to be bothered by breaking straight through a cornfield. I'm not sure, but I also think it had exaggerated leg muscles on the back of its legs, despite being generally slender, but of wiry strength, if that makes sense. It took me a bit to gain my composure, and my hands were still shaking all the way home. This was approximately 8 years ago and happened in Germany. I had alcohol that I intended to drink but did not get to it, so I was sober. I also don't do drugs, nor would I know of any drugs that could cause this kind of specific hallucination belief the user sober or otherwise. I have had my doubts that I might have just been a very tall person. The logistics of something like this living undiscovered so close to civilization and nobody ever sees it seems unrealistic to me. Then again, very tall, deformed, naked people that can run extremely fast hiding near small German villages seem unlikely too. I understand that its appearance might seem cliche, but maybe that is because I only saw it for a short period of time, and maybe it's also a cliche for a reason. Full disclosure, I had another seemingly paranormal encounter when I was a kid, but that was a completely different nature and while I was like 8. So there is a remote possibility that I have momentarily lapses of sanity every other decade, although I am not aware of any psychiatric condition like this. So anyone ever seen something like this, or heard, or is there an urban legend I might have missed? I'd be interested to hear from you if this is the case.
I've been creeping in here for a while, so I figured it was time for me to share my weird little experience. I was just driving around alone at dusk when this summer had just begun. Because, COVID. Gotta fill the time somehow. I was about to pass a swampy nature preserve when I felt a pull, an extreme need to stop and walk into the woods. It was pretty foggy, as it had been raining, and the fact that it was around 8 p.m. didn't do much in the way of lightening the atmosphere. There's this one trail that takes you back underneath a fallen tree to a circular pond surrounded by forest. I walked down the trail and was standing, just admiring the eerily beautiful foggy scene, when I suddenly got the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. Like the air felt electrically charged. I turned, and sitting on top of the tree that I had to walk under to get to my spot was a weird, grayish pale gremlin looking thing. It was crouched over, watching me. But I would guess it was around 2 feet tall, skin and bones, humanoid body. But the face was unpleasant and hard to look at. I don't recall a nose, and the eyes were empty and black. It looked as if it probably had leathery skin, but it was hard to collect an exact image because it was about 75% opaque and 25% transparent. So I ducked behind a tree instinctively, I guess hoping this creature had no concept of object permanence. And when I peeked my head back, it was gone. I full-on sprinted back to my car. I'm not a runner by any means, and I was wearing a skirt, fishnets, and dark martens, so I would only sprint like that if I felt threatened. I FaceTimed my best friend and yelled to her about it frantically, shaking. Pretty sure she thought I was just batshit. For some reason, the fact that it was sitting atop the tree that I had just walked under scared the fuck out of me. Has anyone seen anything similar, or have any idea what it could have been? I used to hang out there all the time, but I haven't returned since.
Hi, Australian here. A while ago I had some issues with a stranger on my lawn. I posted about it in a different subreddit, and I thought it might be a Wendigo or skinwalker. The problem lasted for about a month, but stopped, and for a long time. I haven't had any other creepy late night experiences, aside from 2 cases of sleep paralysis, within a week of each other. Just gonna explain the creature's looks, in case that helps at all. My sleep paralysis demon was extremely obscured, but from what I could see, it had a deer skull for a head, and was wearing a cloak of sorts. It reached out to me, and its arm was extremely bony and thin, and that's about all I could see. Back to the important stuff. The figure I saw a few months ago was human-like, and looked like it was wearing a cloak. Maybe that and my sleep paralysis demon are related somehow. This thing would wait behind the trees and look at me and my home. It made direct eye contact with me at points, like it was challenging me in some way, and I honestly felt tempted to go outside and accept its challenge, but I didn't. Whenever I'd look at it for too long, it would duck behind a tree and an animal would come out. Eventually it disappeared, but 2 nights ago it came back. It actually moved this time. It walked out from behind the tree and got closer to my window. Last night, I tried to ignore it, as recommended by somebody, and it began tapping on my windows, and it banged on my walls. It also tried to open my door and get in my home. I locked my bedroom door, and I fell asleep in my closet. No signs of it this morning. Is this some sort of skinwalker? What do I do to try and ward it off or defend myself? And should I post this in a different subreddit, or is it fine here?
So, little bit of a backstory before I get into the good part. I grew up outside Chicago, but spent my youth summers fishing, camping, and canoeing in Minnesota and parts of Canada. After college, I spent over a decade in the Army and spent a very good chunk of it overseas. Through all of that, plus recreational travel, I've seen a lot of things, and the purpose story of this post still has me perplexed as to what I saw. Currently, I'm living in Southwest Louisiana, working for the sheriff's office where I live. One night, approximately a year ago, I was patrolling through a small town where I live, and I saw something. I still have no clue what the hell it was, but I saw something. I had just made a turn, and as I was heading through this small town, which happens to have a decent amount of wooded area through the town, I saw something across the road in front of my unit. The only way to describe what the hell I saw is like this. It was all black, had a bushy tail, similar to a German Shepherd in portion. It was running on two legs, but it ran hunched, far forward, similar to a raccoon. The problem is, this thing's back was higher than the door-mounted rear-view mirror on my Charger. Now think about this. That's what, 3.5 feet? Whatever I saw, I swear to God, was like 6 feet long, running like this. So it runs across the street, maybe 25 feet in front of my unit, and as soon as my brain processed what the hell I just saw, I turned around as fast as I could and turned on my LED scene light. Whatever it was gone. So here's where it gets really interesting. It was probably around 2 a.m. or so when I saw whatever it was. About an hour afterward, I swing into the local gas station to check on the night shift clerk. We get to talking, and he asked me about the usual, how's the night, and any good calls, anything crazy tonight. I responded saying, yeah man, I saw something. It was weird though. I had just turned off the highway to head south through the town, and I'm not really sure what I saw. The clerk, mind you, I haven't described what I saw or anything to him because I didn't want to sound crazy. The clerk proceeds to tell me how, a few days prior, he was riding his bike home just after midnight, and how he saw something as well. He goes on to describe the exact same thing I saw. I literally stood there dumbfounded and didn't say a word. I honest to God get chills every time I think about this night. The clerk looked at my response to what he described to me and literally said, "Oh shit, you saw it too?" Thank God, I thought I was crazy. I've told this story to my brother, who is really into the Bigfoot, Dogman, lizard scene, and he thinks I might have seen a juvenile dogman. What do you all think?
A couple of months ago, my friend and I decided that we would like to go down this place called Black Canyon. It's a nice rural spot, not too many people go there, but the main attraction is the lake and the small cliffs that you can jump off of. It's always better to go later in the day so that the sun isn't beating on you the whole time. So, my friend and I decided that it would be wise to get there around 6 p.m. It was honestly like any other kind of day, nothing out of the ordinary. There were people hanging out in this middle of nowhere place, and we were all having a good time. I sent some off of the cliff, but then I forgot about the natural water slide that's about a 3 to 5 minute walk away from the lake, and I asked the people to watch over our stuff, got my friend, and decided to go check it out since I haven't gone down there in a long while. It took us about 5 minutes to get there since my friend is very cautious, and looking at it now, if they hadn't been, I might have had a bad run in whatever the hell we came into contact with. Right, As we were about to get to the water slide, I heard this indescribable noise. The closest thing to it was like a demonic generator going off. It was certainly nothing I have ever heard before. In all honesty, I didn't believe what I was hearing at first, so I quickly turned to my friend and asked, "Hey dude, did you hear the same thing that I just did?" My friend turned and looked a little frightened and said, "Yeah." Neither of us could determine what it was, but that wasn't going to stop me from going down the slide. And yes, that was a terrible decision. I started to walk on down to the natural water slide, leaving my friend behind, when I swear I saw a round head and a lanky arm fly behind a rock I was about to pass by. I froze at first, but I figured that my eyes were playing tricks on me. People see things that aren't real all the time, right? Anyway, I only took one step forward before I heard the same noise as before, only much louder. The same demonic-like generator noise boomed out from behind the rock that I saw something dart behind. After that, I turned tail and ran as fast as I could back to my friend. I asked again in a frightened tone, practically yelling, "Did you hear that?" My friend looked as on edge as I was and just responded with a simple yes. After hearing my friend's answer, we ran as fast as we could back to the lake. When we came back and out of breath, the people asked us what was wrong, and I told them what my friend and I had encountered, and they looked extremely surprised. A man then spoke up and told me that I wasn't the only one with this sort of run-in. He told me that many people have told him that they've heard strange noises over by the waterfall. People believed it to be a skinwalker or a wendigo. After hearing that, I've never gone back to that waterfall since. Something lingers there, and I don't really want to find out what.
I've recently tried to discuss this story with my boyfriend, but I don't feel any relief about what happened to me in high school. He tries to explain it away as a group hallucination or someone pulling a prank on my friends and I, but I know deep down what happened was unfortunately real, and it still gives me great anxiety when I think of it. The story took place in Lower Alabama when I was in high school, almost 8 years ago, but I still remember every detail like it happened moments ago. 3 friends and I were making the trip to our other friend's house, way out in the boondocks, probably 30 minutes outside of any nearby city or town. There's only one road that takes you to his house, and it's just a long strip of old concrete that is in dire need of repair. But considering only a handful of people live out there, why would the state waste their time and money? On both sides of the road is just dense forest that creeps to the edge of the road sometimes, hardly nowhere to pull off, and absolutely no streetlights. We were in my friend's brand new red Mustang that he got for his birthday, and he was proud to drive us all around wherever we wanted to go. It was him, we'll call him Jamie, driving my friend, we'll call him Dave, in the passenger seat, and myself and my other friend, we'll call her Mary, crammed into the back seat among his giant sound system. No seatbelts, just half standing, half sitting on the floorboards. It was very uncomfortable, and the rattling of the music shook my entire body, but I was just happy one of us had a vehicle to take us over to our buddy's house. We turned onto the long strip of road that would take us there, and was very disappointed that there was another car not too far ahead of us, which meant Jamie couldn't show off how fast his new car could go. Although there's no crazy turns or curves in the road, its solid white line the whole way because of the endless hills, making it impossible to pass anyone. We accepted that we'd have to go the speed limit, and Jamie finally turned the music down so he could talk shit about the tiny red Toyota that we'd been staring at the back of for about half an hour. It's about 9 p.m., and there was no moon visible through the dense clouds, so it was pitch black beside our headlights and the car in front of us with his own headlights, which were their brights because I'm sure they were aware of the tons of deer that live out there. No other vehicles came from the other direction, and no one was behind us. We drove for only about 10 minutes, cutting up and hardly paying attention to the road, since we knew where we were going. Suddenly, the car in front of us slammed on brakes, skidding their tires, stopping in the middle of the road. Jamie wasn't following too closely, so we didn't have to do the same, but we came to a slow stop maybe 15 feet behind them. There was a brief pause before we heard a woman's blood-curdling scream coming from the Toyota. We had the windows down because some of us had been smoking cigarettes, and that's when we saw it. We had stopped on a declining hill, so we could see in front of the Toyota, and what we saw, I'll never be able to forget. It was some kind of humanoid-looking creature, standing on all fours, but the arch of its back was taller than the little Toyota. The only thing that made it humanoid was its hairless skin. It was very pale, almost gray, very wrinkly, and its limbs were impossibly long. Its forearm was longer than any human's entire arm. The legs, fingers, arms, neck, everything looked like stretched taffy, and we could see all of its bones through its skin, especially the backbones that were almost spike-like because they jutted out so much. It wasn't facing us, just stopped mid-stride in the middle of the road, facing the right side of the forest. It had backward-facing knees like a bird's legs, no tail, but still had the posture of some kind of animal. I hope to God it was an animal, but there's no animal in Alabama that would be taller than a car on all fours. And like I said, it had human-like skin, hands, feet, and its head was like a human skull. No one in our car said a word, and Jamie instinctively hit the lock button for the doors, though our windows were still down, and the woman in the Toyota was still screaming bloody murder. For a moment, I remember telling myself it was just some kind of fucked up prank, a weird art sculpture or something, because it wasn't moving at all. But then, those thoughts quickly dissipated when the thing cocked its head in our direction. Its face was just as terrible as the rest of its body, pale and wrinkly, just an indentation for a nose, tiny black holes for eyes, no ears, and an impossibly large red stained mouth that formed into a wicked smile, showing its multiple rows of pointed teeth. The woman's scream grew terribly louder at that moment, and the thing seemed to finally be almost startled by it, turning its head back towards the forest, taking only about 2 giant fluid animal-like steps, and disappearing into the woods on our right without making any sound. As soon as it was out of sight, Jamie slowly crept the Mustang forward around the still-stopped Toyota, and we saw a man and a woman frantically arguing and crying in the front seat. When we got in front of them, the man puts the Toyota in reverse and goes a bit off-road to turn around and floors it in the direction where we came from. Apparently, where they were headed wasn't important enough. I almost thought we should do the same, but I couldn't get myself to make a sound, let alone a word or sentence. Jamie went only about 5 miles over the speed limit as he rolled up the windows, and no one said a word for the rest of the 20-minute drive. When we finally got to our friend's house, he was waiting outside for us, waving as he pulled in the little dirt driveway. All 4 of us scrambled out, pushing past him to get inside the house. I remember him saying something like, "Whoa, looks like you guys saw a ghost or something." Dave turns to him with the most serious face and says, "Or something. Yeah." We got inside, and part of me was still thinking it was some sort of hallucination, even though we hadn't drank or smoked that day at all. So being the artist of the group, I asked our friend for paper and pencils. Without question, he retrieved them, and while sitting in his living room, I suggested that we all should try to draw exactly what we saw before we tried to discuss anything. Sure enough, each of us drew the exact same creature and showed it to our friend before explaining the full story. He was horrified and took the drawings out back to his small fire pit and lit them ablaze. None of us protested because we never wanted a visual of that thing again. He asked us things like, had we been drugged or were we pulling a fast one on him? But considering that there were 2 other people that saw the same thing, and most of us were to the point of tears, he knew we weren't lying. He led us back inside, locked his doors and windows, and put on a movie to distract us. But we kept bringing it up, trying to make any sense out of it, and got hardly any sleep at all. Jamie took us all home the next day, and we saw the Toyota's black skid marks in the road where it happened, confirming it wasn't all an elaborate shared dream. And before we dropped off Mary, she told us she didn't want to hang out with us anymore, simply because being around us would remind her of it. We sort of just nodded, and I honestly haven't spoke to her since. I rarely speak to the other 2 friends anymore for other reasons, but a few times I've tried to bring it up to them, and they refuse to want to talk about it. I know they know it happened. It's just too painful for them to discuss, which is understandable. I hate talking about it to this day, and I've only told 2 of my closest friends, and now my boyfriend, who's very opposed to any supernatural thing. So you can understand why I didn't get any relief by talking to him about it. I never really believed in those sort of things, either before that incident, but it's definitely changed my perspective a bit. Please let me know if any of you have seen something similar. I've tried researching it, and people keep saying it's a skinwalker, a rake, or wendigo, but the descriptions never fully match up. I guess I'd just like to put a name to whatever that terrible thing that prowls lower Alabama woods was. I'd like to know if this thing has a name, so please read its description in paragraph 3 if you think you can help. I've posted in a few other subreddits, hoping I can get some kind of an answer. Thank you for stopping by. to check out the latest episode of Strange and Unusual Stories. I would like to extend a very special thank you to all of the narrators who joined me on this episode. Please be sure to go on over to their channels and check out their awesome and horrifying content. All of their links will be down in the description below. If you have a story that you would like to submit, feel free to send me a quick email. To keep up with future content, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. Thank you all for listening, and as always, I am your host, Marie.